Have you ever wondered why reality is structured exactly as it is? Have you noticed that reality is structured in a very specific, deliberate, and intelligent way? It's not just a random hodgepodge of events and things happening. Well, I want to explain to you why reality is structured exactly as it is. This is going to be the highest level understanding of reality and life that you can possibly have. And I've recently become conscious of this. I've had some new, deeper awakenings beyond anything I've explained thus far, which has deepened my understanding specifically of human behavior and human psychology and how it connects with existential questions about the nature of reality. And so the amazing thing is that it's possible to become fully omniscient and conscious of why the universe exists and why it is precisely as it is and not some other way. So this is what I'll be explaining here today. This, of course, requires an extremely open mind. This is some very advanced stuff. This is not a belief system or an ideology. Please don't take it as such. This is something that you can become directly conscious of, as I have. So there's a certain logic to reality and to God. God just means reality. I'll be using these words interchangeably. So I'm going to be talking about the logic of God. It's a very elegant logic, a very elegant sort of structure. So, where do we begin? What is reality? Reality is infinity. Reality is God. Reality is love. Reality is consciousness. All these words are identical at the deepest level. So reality is an infinite conscious field. This field is singular. It's one. There aren't multiple of these fields. There's only one of this field. This field is completely unlimited. This field is what you're immersed in right now and what you've experienced your entire life and what you will ever experience. It's everything that could ever possibly be experienced by any living being or creature or anything, even inanimate objects. All of it is part of this infinite field of consciousness which comprises the entire universe. So ordinarily we like to think of consciousness as something that biological beings have. No. Consciousness is that field, that impersonal field which dreams up the entire universe, including humans, animals, plants, planets, rocks, stars, everything that could ever be experienced is dreamed up by this field. You could think of it as an infinite mind. That's what it is. It's infinity. Why is this field singular and not multiple? How come there can't be multiple gods, multiple realities, multiple universes, multiple consciousnesses? There can't, because what you have to do is you have to contemplate the nature of this field. When you start to contemplate it, you start to realize that every boundary between two objects within this field is actually contained within the field itself and part of the field, and therefore is not anything that separates the two objects. So for example, we could have like an apple and a banana, and then we could say, well, but these are two separate objects. Or we could have your mom and your dad, and we could say, well, these are two separate objects, two separate beings with two separate consciousnesses. But that's not really the case, because what is actually the case is that both of these objects are supposedly separated by some boundary. You might say, well, the banana and the apple are separated by the air in between them. But is that really something that separates the two, or is that actually something that unites the two? So you have to realize that all these boundaries between your mom and your dad, a banana and an apple, and so forth, all these boundaries are themselves imaginary, and that they all ultimately break down such that you're always in a single unified field. This single unified field is your field. It's not just some impersonal field out there somewhere. It's you. You are the field. You are the whole field, and you are also identified with a part of the field, which is the physical body, what we call the physical body. So by contemplating the nature of consciousness, you realize that it has to be one. Once you understand that it's one, there's some radical consequences and implications that come from this oneness. If consciousness is one, that means it's completely unlimited. It can't have any limits because for something to limit something else, it has to be separate from it. There has to be two things. Like there has to be me over here and then something outside of me that is limiting me. So when you become so conscious as to realize that consciousness is one and that you are it and that there's nothing outside of you, that means you're absolute. That means you're completely unlimited. That means you're self-created. That means that literally every single limit that you believe exists in reality, it doesn't exist somewhere out there in reality. It's created by you. So I became so conscious that I became infinitely conscious. In this state of infinite consciousness, it's like entering complete God mode. You enter complete God mode and you realize that every single limit is completely imaginary. That means that the only reason you can't put $1 billion into your bank account right now is because you're imposing that limit upon yourself through your mind and your imagination. That means the only reason that you can't change the diameter of the moon with your mind right now is literally because you're imagining that limit and you're imposing that limit upon yourself. Because when you are infinitely conscious, and this is the most shocking and unbelievable aspect of reality, is that if you enter a state of infinite consciousness, you will also enter a state of complete unlimited power, which means that you're able to imagine anything and you're able to create entire realities from scratch. That's what it means, and it's absolutely the case. Now, of course, most people think that this is some fantasy or some absurd notion because they say, oh, well, Leo, but so if you became infinitely conscious, why didn't you just put $1 million in your bank account or something like that? Some silly materialistic goal like this. What you have to understand is that when you become infinitely conscious, truly infinitely conscious, to the point where you have infinite power, you're in such a radically altered state that ideas of putting millions of dollars into your bank account don't even occur to you because this is ridiculous. Because it's so much more profound than something as petty and as shallow as that. Even ideas such as trying to heal your own self, which I've been experimenting with. Like maybe you have a disease and you think that, well, Leo, if I ever entered into a state of complete unlimited consciousness that I could do anything, I'm all powerful, I would just change myself to make myself look beautiful and to cure all my ailments so I don't have to take any pills anymore. And I would do everything. I would set up my whole life to be perfect. But you see, your desire to do that comes from selfishness. Your desire to make yourself look more beautiful and to cure any diseases you have and to, put money in your bank account and so forth. It's all selfishness. But the problem is that you can't enter into a state of infinite consciousness while you're selfish. The cost of entry into unlimited consciousness is giving up yourself completely in all of your attachments and desires. So there is such a state that I would call it God mode. In video games, often they have a cheat code that you can type into the console command, which puts the player character into what's called God mode. And what this does, this is like a mode that is for developers. It's not for players because it ruins the whole game, of course. Because you can just, once you're in God mode in a video game, you can just give yourself unlimited lives. You can give yourself unlimited money, unlimited resources, unlimited jump height, unlimited speed, whatever, right? It breaks the entire game. But it exists for developers when they were originally creating the game so that they could troubleshoot the game, they could bug test it, they could, fast travel wherever they wanted to, they can just put millions of resources into their account so that they could just, test the system, make sure it works properly. Then they remove all those and they place deliberate limits on the player. And then that's what creates the game. So reality works exactly the same way. Reality is a design by a sentient, infinite, intelligent consciousness or being. This being is not something separate from you, but it is you. You completely designed your own life down to every molecule. And then what you did is you removed yourself from the God mode. You forgot that you are God and that you are in God mode, and you deliberately limited yourself to put yourself into the dream that you dreamed up for yourself. That's what your life is. So what I'm telling you is that before you were born, you were in total God mode and you completely designed your own life. Not just your own life, but the entire universe. You designed the entire thing because it's unlimited. You see, you have to realize that your consciousness is completely unlimited. There's no reason why you couldn't do that. Now, from inside the dream, you're sitting and you're thinking like, oh, well, Leo, this sounds very outlandish. It sounds like a fantasy. And the reason you say that is because you're so limited by this dream. You can't jump to the moon. You can't change the diameter of the moon just by thinking about it. You can't just put $1 million in your bank account just by wishing for it and all this sorts of stuff. So this makes you feel very limited and makes you feel as though there's no such thing as God mode. God mode feels like a fantasy. It makes no scientific sense. But actually, I want you to contemplate deeper. Really contemplate, why would there be any limits within reality? You say, well, reality has to be a certain way. Why? Well, but there has to be gravity. Why? There has to be 3 dimensions of space. Why? There has to be time. Why? Don't take these things for granted. Actually ask why these things exist. And consider the possibility that none of these limits are inherent to what consciousness or reality is. It can be any way, just by wishing it that way. Now you might say, but that's impossible. That sounds like magic. Exactly. Infinity is the impossible made possible because there's nothing outside of it. You see. Magic is a funny thing. We tend to think that magic can't be real. Again, why is that? Why can't magic be real? Well, because in our world, we know that there's like physical rules that we have to follow. And we can't just do whatever we want. I can't just wish for, being skinny and then I'm skinny tomorrow. Or I wish for having a beautiful family, then I have a beautiful family tomorrow. I can't just materialize things that way. But ask yourself, why not? What would stop reality from being able to materialize anything it wants? You might say, well, surely it must be limited. Why? Why can't it be unlimited? So as you contemplate this, at some point you'll realize that it actually can be unlimited. Not only can it be, it must be. Because for reality to be limited, that's actually the impossibility. How can reality be limited? What is limiting it? If reality is limited, something has to limit it from the outside. If something is limiting from the outside, that means there must be 2 things. There must be reality and then something above reality, like a meta-reality, which is limiting the reality in this case. But then you ask yourself, well, what's the boundary that separates reality from the meta-reality, which is limiting it? And then you realize that that boundary itself is just a part of reality. It's one. See, so you erase all these boundaries until you realize complete oneness. And when you realize that, then you realize reality is completely sovereign or absolute. It's completely self-created. Any limits that exist within reality are imposed by itself. And since you are reality, you're not merely a piece of reality, but you are reality. You're the sum total of reality. That means that you are completely self-created and that you imposed every single one of your limits. That means if you have a toothache, you created your toothache. That means if you're struggling to pay your mortgage because you're working some crap job, you created that. That means if you have some disease, you created your disease. Now, this is very difficult for many people to swallow. because your experience of life certainly doesn't feel like you are God. And this is one of the biggest objections that people have, I think, intuitively when I tell them that you're God, and you are God, because you created yourself and the entire universe. But the problem is that, of course, you're not conscious of it. You're not conscious that you're God. You're not conscious of how you're creating yourself. So the entire process of reality, and here now we're starting to get into the logic and the structure of why life is structured the way that it is. The structure of life is to become more and more conscious of how you are creating everything around you and how you created yourself, until you reach such a high level of consciousness that you awaken to the fact that you actually are literally the only being in the universe, and that you created the entire universe, and that that's what God is. That's what reality is. Now you might wonder, well, Leo, this sounds very outlandish. Why? Why? It seems kind of silly. Why would the universe play these games of hide and seek with itself? If I am God, as you claim, Leo, then why don't I remember being in God mode when I created my own life? And here is really the key insight that explains it all, is that God is love. So see, love is identical with oneness. It's identical with consciousness. It's identical with being unlimited. It's identical with infinity. So let me explain, because this love notion trips a lot of people up. Love in its highest form, what it is, it's the complete embrace of oneself. Since the universe is one, it has no end, nor does it have a beginning. It's boundless in all directions. Since the universe is infinite in all directions and all dimensions, since it's completely unlimited, it literally is love, because love is just the embrace of a thing. To love a thing is just to embrace it exactly as it is, without needing to change it. So when consciousness, this field, is infinitely conscious of itself, it realizes what it is. It realizes that it is absolute. It realizes that there's nothing outside of it, and it falls in love with itself, because to be God is simply to be love, and is to be infinitely conscious. But then there are lower gradations of consciousness. So most creatures and beings and humans exist at lower gradations of consciousness, which are not infinite. Right now, you're listening to me, you're not in an infinite state of consciousness. If you were, you couldn't be sitting there listening to me. Because that's a finite state. You listening to some specific words I'm saying. See, I'm saying these words now. A minute later, I'm saying some other words there, and different words, different things. You're sitting there, you're looking at a certain specific way. You're in a certain specific finite form. When consciousness becomes completely infinite, it loses all form, because in a sense, all forms cancel out, and it just becomes a pure singularity of potential. Just think of pure infinite potential of what the universe was before the Big Bang. It was just pure, undifferentiated potential that didn't actualize itself yet in some specific way. It wasn't a cat, it wasn't a dog, it wasn't a tree, it wasn't a dinosaur, it wasn't a human, it wasn't a planet, it wasn't a star, it wasn't an atom, it wasn't a molecule, it wasn't energy, it wasn't space, it wasn't time, it wasn't anything. It was pure infinity. We might call that the Godhead. In this form, consciousness is at its most essential. It's absolutely complete. It's what you might imagine reality would be if there was nothing. So think about, what if there was never anything? What if there was never a Big Bang? What would there be? Well, there would be just pure undifferentiated infinity. You might say that's nothing. There was nothing, but it's not quite nothing. It's nothing, but it's a nothing that exists. It is nothing. So that's a state of consciousness you can access through a psychedelic or through yoga or through meditation or through contemplation, these various techniques. But most of us, usually, we exist at a lower state of consciousness. Why do we exist at this particular state of consciousness? And why are we living our life doing all this stuff in life? Is there some connection between that and this infinite singularity that I was talking about? And there is. So here's the image that I want you to picture. The entire structure of the entire universe, we could say, is as follows. At the very center of reality, there is this infinite singularity of pure, undifferentiated potential that contains absolutely everything combined inside of it until everything cancels out into just a pure nothingness. That's the Godhead. So there's that. And then what there is there's not just that, but there's everything around it. So sort of think of it like our solar system. You have the sun in the middle, then you have Earth and other planets orbiting at various distances, asteroid belts and so forth around the sun. The sun is sort of the thing that holds our solar system together. So that's kind of like how reality is as a whole. At the center of it that holds everything together is this pure formless Godhead. Then as you get out from the center, you become less whole, less complete, and more finite, more fragmented. So consciousness in its most complete form is in the very middle here. And then as you move out to the sides, consciousness fragments itself in various ways, and it can fragment itself in an unlimited number of ways. So the periphery of this circle goes out forever. There's no end. It's boundless in all directions. But at the center of it is that singularity. And the further you get out here, consciousness becomes more and more fragmented and less whole. It becomes a smaller piece of the whole. So imagine that here at the very center, if we had a vase, this is a complete, perfect vase, not a single crack. And then as you get out towards the edge here, this vase gets more and more cracked and more cracked and more cracked until pieces start breaking off. Those pieces break off, and then those pieces themselves crack and break off. And those crack and break apart and break apart and break apart until you get little tiny, tiny little fragments of the original vase, such that this tiny fragment doesn't even look like it's part of the vase anymore. It's like a single atom of the original vase. Very, very disconnected. So you see what this model is modeling is simply the degree of disconnectedness or incompleteness of consciousness. So consciousness is able to fragment itself out to infinity, and then it's also able to recollect itself, recollect all the pieces, merge them together into that single, unified, complete, perfect whole. And that, in a nutshell, is what reality is. It's that. And what that is God, that is consciousness, that is love, that is oneness. See, the oneness is so absolute that it encompasses not just pure oneness in its perfect, form as a vase, complete vase, but even all the fragments of it as well. That's the key you have to realize with oneness. And since God has no beginning and no end, because infinity has no beginning and no end, infinity has no outer edge, no inner edge. Infinity has no center, because every point in infinity is its center. that means that God is not necessarily guaranteed to always be this singularity. I mean, it is that, but it's also everything surrounding it, all the entire sort of debris field around the singularity. Now, this entire debris field, this is what we call living conscious beings, like animals and humans. So you as a human, me as a human, and maybe your pet dog or something, or pet cat, we exist somewhere away from the center. And the question is, how far away from the center are we? The closer to the center we are, the more godlike we are, the more conscious we are. As we raise our consciousness more and more and more, we approach the center more and more and more, just like, you know, if a planet or some satellite is orbiting the sun, if we adjust its velocity, the orbit will sort of, spiral inwards, inwards, inwards until it hits the sun. And the closer it gets to the sun, the hotter and the brighter it gets. The further away it is from the sun, the colder it is, especially out on the very periphery of the solar system. So those beings who are very, very unconscious, like maybe an ant or a butterfly, they're very far from the center. Those human beings, for example, who behave like animals, terrorists, murderers, thieves, criminals, and so forth, they're part of mankind. Overall, mankind is much closer to the center than an animal. But mankind, there's an enormous range of consciousness that mankind can have. Some humans are very saintly and very godlike, and some are criminals and despicable monsters and devils. And so those people, the only thing that separates a devil, tyrant, dictator / criminal from a saint or from someone like Jesus Christ or the Buddha is simply their degree of consciousness and how close they are to the center, their degree of wholeness and completeness. And so if you take a living being and you inch closer and closer and closer and closer to the center, eventually what happens is that as it gets closer, all of its selfish tendencies and all of its fear and attachments, they get burned away by the light of consciousness until eventually you merge into the singularity, you become completely selfless, and you become identical with God. You become the Godhead. You become complete, infinite, omniscient, all-powerful. But as you get further away from the center, the opposite happens. You lose your power. You become selfish. You become finite. You become limited. You're less and less able to manipulate the world, and your will is less and less able to be manifested directly into reality. So while a human is like, let's say over here, relative to the singularity, human has some ability to manifest stuff in the world. Humans can accomplish amazing things. Some human imagined the pyramids and it was built. That's willpower right there. Now, of course, they still needed thousands of hardworking laborers to actually build those pyramids brick by brick. That took many, many years and lots of work. It wasn't just instantly materialized. But if the human, here's the problem with the terminology here. If the human became completely godlike, moved closer and closer to the singularity, at some point you would no longer be able to distinguish the human from the singularity, and actually the human would lose its form. You couldn't actually maintain your human body anymore because your human body is limiting you in certain ways. If you're in the human body, you can only jump so high. If you were in a kangaroo's body, you could jump higher. And if you were, in a bird's body, you could even fly. And if you had some alien body, maybe you could do something else that's, completely impossible for Earth beings to do. See? So the nature of consciousness is that the only way consciousness can be omniscient, omnipotent, is if it's completely unlimited. Because omniscience and omnipotence are qualities of the unlimited. But if you're unlimited, you can't have any form. You see, that's the trade-off. So if you wonder why limited creatures don't have unlimited powers, it's because they're limited creatures. The way that you are, the specific concrete way that you are, limits what you can do. So if you want to have no limits as to what you can do, you need to be completely unlimited, which means you can't have any form whatsoever. Or in another sense, you could say you need to have every form. You need to have the form of a human, you need to have the form of a kangaroo, the form of a butterfly, the form of a bird, the form of an alien, the form of everything, in order to be able to do what everything does. You see. So humans are somewhere around here, and then other creatures are less capable than humans, and that's because they're less conscious, and therefore they have even less power, less manifesting ability. So many animals, they're basically helpless. Like your cat can't really help itself very much because it's not very conscious. Now here's the real trick of this whole thing. To be God in its purest form, you need to be completely selfless. Why must you be selfless? You must be selfless because if you have any kind of self, it would be a finite self. So for example, if you thought you were a human, then you'd be limited to the abilities of a human. If you thought you were a bird, you'd be limited to the abilities of a bird and so forth. See? So to be at the singularity, you must be completely selfless. To be completely selfless, that's the same thing as saying that you're completely loving. Let's explain love here. Love, from the existential perspective, is, well, it's really not different than the normal love. You see, what is love? Love is desire for a thing. That's ultimately what love is. So if you love sex, that's what you desire, sex. If you love money, then that's what you desire is money. If you love that person over there, you desire that person over some other person. If you love your children, well, that means you would desire your children over some other children. See, desire comes in many forms and degrees. But ultimately, the highest desire is the desire for everything. Unlimited desire. So what you have to recognize is that in your own life, you've been living your whole life, and your entire life, if you notice this, has been dictated by desire. Desire is what controls all motivation of all humans. There's many qualities of desire. There are more selfish desires and there are more selfless desires. There are more finite desires and there are more infinite, unlimited desires. There are narrower and wider desires. For example, I could have a desire to own a specific person. Like I like her so much that not only do I want to sleep with her, I want to own her. Literally, she's going to be my slave. I could have that kind of desire. See, it's a very kind of narrow desire, very selfish desire. Because like, why do I want to own her? Well, because she will gratify me and I get to control her and do whatever I want, and that fulfills me. That makes me feel more powerful. So there's a desire there to feel powerful. There's a desire there to control other people, and that, that gets me off, that sort of thing. But then if my desire expands, I could have a desire not to want to own her. I could say, well, I admire her, maybe I even want to sleep with her, but I don't want to own her. I actually desire for her to be self-determined and to have her own life independent of me. Now, for me to have that kind of desire, I would need to be more conscious and more selfless. You see, now I need to surrender my own need to control her and to manipulate her because, as I release my own control, that means I can't get everything I want from her. I might want some sex, but then, if she's busy, I can't get that from her. I can't demand it from her because I don't control her, because I don't own her. See, I've relinquished that. That means I have to get over my own cravings and needs in order to be more selfless. But if my desire becomes even wider and even more selfless, then I won't even get attached to her and being in a relationship with her and maybe even marrying her and then having her have her own life, but still like pleasing me in certain ways. I could just have a desire that's so universal that I desire for all human beings to be self-determined and to love themselves and to care for themselves and to have a good life and to be happy. I could have that kind of desire. In this case, I'd have to surrender so much of my own needs and attachments in order to be so selfless that I could genuinely desire that for others without needing anything in return. You see, because if I spend all of my time sitting on the couch just desiring for all of mankind to live in love and peace and happiness, well, how do I get my own needs met? How do I put food on my table? How do I feed my children? How do I get my sexual needs met? How do I get my business finances secured and all this sorts of stuff? I can't. You see, there's a trade-off there. As long as I'm worrying about myself, the more I worry about myself and how to survive in the world, the less energy and consciousness I can allocate towards the caring for others. And in fact, there's a sort of a tug-of-war dynamic that gets established because, you know, if I'm trying to, secure resources for my family, I'm taking those resources oftentimes from others. So, as you can see, there's a deep existential trade-off here that's going on between desire and personal attachment and needs of a living being for survival and those of being selfless. So the way that the reality is structured as a whole is that the more selfless you become, the more of your attachments and fears you surrender, your desire becomes more and more universal and selfless until you reach the singularity. When you reach the singularity, you become so formless. You become so unlimited. You become so selfless. You completely lose all fear and all attachment to any kind of need to exist in any particular way, that you literally become pure infinite potential. You cease to exist as a human or as any kind of material object, and you become the Godhead, and you become completely one, unlimited, complete, whole, pure love, pure goodness, pure selflessness. But the cost of that is that you surrender everything. The cost of it is total. See? And that is the true test of your selflessness. Are you willing to surrender absolutely everything and become completely formless? If you are, then you're completely selfless. And if you're not, then that's the degree to which you're selfish. And so now here's the kicker. Here's what explains the structure of the entire universe. Every living being is at some distance removed from the formless singularity, because it has to be, otherwise it couldn't be a living being, it couldn't be alive, it couldn't be engaged in survival, it couldn't have any form. It couldn't look like anything. And so there's an infinite number of beings all along the line here at different distances removed from the singularity. The closer a being is to the singularity, the more conscious it is, the more selfless it is, the more loving it is, the more complete it is, the less its desire is about personal craving and satisfaction, fulfillment, and the more it is about the betterment of the entire universe. And the further the being is away, over here somewhere from the singularity, then that being is very selfish, very attached to its particular way of life, very survival-oriented, very fear-based. Why is it fear-based? Because it's afraid of losing itself. It's afraid of death. It's afraid of disintegration. Because it's so afraid, it has to be extremely selfish. Selfishness and fear are basically the same thing. See? And it's very attached. So you've probably known people all along this spectrum. This is how you can validate some of the things I'm saying here. At least you can begin to validate it. Some people you've known in your life were very generous, very selfless, weren't too worried about themselves, satisfying themselves. They lived their life for the benefit of others. Maybe one of your parents, if you were lucky, was this way. And some people are the exact opposite of that. They're extremely selfish. They're fearful. They're afraid of everything. They're afraid of not having enough money. They're afraid of people. They're afraid of war. They're afraid of disease. They're afraid of themselves. They're afraid of emotions. They're afraid of doing some hard work. They're afraid of everything. Well, these people tend to be very attached, very neurotic, very dysfunctional, not very conscious, not very loving. Why are they not loving? Because they're so needy that they can't give any love to anybody. Maybe one of your parents was that way. Hopefully not, but it's very common that at least one of your parents was that way. And if they were, then they infected you with that selfishness and that neurosis and that fear. Any fear that existed deep within your parents probably got transferred over into you to some degree. But also, that's true for love as well. Any deep love that existed in your parents probably also imprinted and transferred into you to some degree. So now to explain the structure of reality. Because God is love, and reality is love, the genius behind the design of what God is doing is that God recognizes that everything that I've been explaining in this model is the absolute structure of what God is. God isn't just the singularity. God is the singularity plus all the entire surrounding debris field, all the fragments as well. When God is infinitely conscious, God recognizes that, and it embraces all of itself, such that God recognizes that there are, we might say, lost souls. There are beings and creatures and people in the universe who are very, very far away from the center, very disconnected from God. But God understands that because it's infinitely conscious, and God realizes that it can't be otherwise. So, because God is infinitely conscious, it recognizes that there's nothing that can be done about this other than to accept it and to embrace it and to love it. So God doesn't sit up high in the clouds and just project its love on the world. See, God's love is so powerful that not only is God able to sit up in the clouds, so to speak, but simultaneously God is fully conscious that it is all those pieces of itself that are separated from itself, that are lost from itself, that are seeking to reconnect and to become whole again. And so the genius of God's design is that what's going to happen as the universe unfolds, and this is the purpose behind time, is that as time clicks away, what happens is that all of these pieces are slowly, as though pulled by a gravitational force, getting attracted, orbiting closer and closer, spiraling inwards towards the singularity, just like the way that stars do within the Milky Way galaxy. If you look at a spiral galaxy from up top, you see that the stars are all orbiting a supermassive black hole at the very center, and eventually all of them will get sucked into this supermassive black hole, and then eventually that black hole will explode under the pressure of all the stars that get sucked into it, and then the whole process will begin again. This is exactly what's happening with reality as a whole. Every piece is gradually being pulled towards the center until eventually it will get drawn into the singularity, and it will recollect itself. All the pieces will recollect itself and assemble themselves into God. And through this process, every living being is able to participate in what God is, and God is able to awaken to itself, and God is able to go through this cycle of separation from itself, forgetting itself, and then recollecting, remembering itself, and becoming complete. So now, this gravitational force that I've been speaking of, this is actually desire. So here's the real profound insight for you. And this is actually quite practical. Every desire that you've ever had in your life, and every desire that every living being has ever had in its life, has been the desire for a fragment of consciousness to ultimately seek completion. You see, notice that your desires are finite. You desire that person, but not this person. You desire this situation, but not that situation. You desire the temperature to be hotter, but not colder, or vice versa, or whatever. You desire this car, but not that car. You see, your desire is finite. The reason your desire is finite is because you are finite. You're a finite piece of consciousness. And a finite piece of consciousness can't help itself but to have a finite desire. Because to have infinite, unlimited desire, indiscriminate desire, that would be infinite love. And infinite love can only exist at the singularity. So you're not there. But in God's infinite design, infinite wisdom, what it puts inside of you is desire, specifically the desires you need to inch you closer and closer and closer towards the singularity. But now here's the interesting wrinkle, is that because God is consciousness, God can't push you into the singularity. You have to willingly enter the singularity of your own free choice from becoming more conscious, which is why you can't take a very needy person, a very selfish person, a criminal person, an evil person. You can't take a devil and force him to start to love everybody. Why not? What stops a criminal from being very loving? Fear. Fear of what? Fear of losing his identity, his attachments, and ultimately self-annihilation. Because to move towards the singularity, to become more loving from any point on this field, to move towards the singularity is a loss of a sense of self, relatively speaking. So for a criminal to become more loving, he would have to lose some part of himself, the criminal part, that part that's afraid, that part that's attached, that part that's hateful and malicious and we might call evil, the dark part of himself. Now, where did a criminal get this dark part of himself? Well, probably because his parents were also criminals, and the way that they raised him wasn't very good. He probably grew up somewhere in poverty, in a ghetto somewhere. And then, he was probably beaten and abused by his mother and his father, and they probably did drugs around him. And so he got this bad influence. He probably grew up in a poor neighborhood where there just wasn't opportunity. He couldn't get a job. He couldn't go to decent school. When he went to school, people picked on him. His teachers didn't care about him. And so he's grown up. This is the classic criminal stereotype. This sort of person has grown up never experiencing love. So this person is literally disconnected from the possibility of true love. And yet at the same time, the only thing that this being wants, this criminal wants, is love, you see. So the being is in sort of a bind. It was born, and its true nature is love, because the nature of all of reality is love. Deep down somewhere it knows that, and it's seeking that love, but it doesn't know how. It's not conscious enough to understand how to find this love. And the methods that it's tried, like it's tried to get love from its mother, from its father, from its teachers, from its friends at school and all this, and all of those methods, what if they all fail? If they all succeed, it's fine, it's easy. But what if they all fail? Well, then this being is left completely crippled and dysfunctional. And now it lashes out at the world to try to get the love. Now it goes, steals money. Now it goes, beats people up. Now it goes, sells drugs. Now it goes, does heroin. Now it goes, gets in a fist fight or something like that. All of that is it acting out, trying to receive love that it doesn't know how to otherwise get, that its environment is not allowing it to get. Like if a child is born in a war zone, the child doesn't have the opportunity to go to a university and to become some, educated professional. The child needs to now resort to terrorism to survive in that war zone. And so that's how the child gets its love, is by becoming a terrorist. And you see, so to transform this sort of being who's never experienced love into a saintly person, this is the hardest thing in the world. How does God transform such a person into a saint? Gradually, through desire, through a hierarchy of desires that are higher and higher and higher and higher in quality and more selfless. But you see, as much as God would love to just appear to you and to just shower you with love, the problem is that most people aren't ready to tolerate that degree of love. You see, God's love is so selfless, so indiscriminate, so formless, that if you were to experience it, you would literally lose yourself. You would lose your mind, and you would ultimately lose your physical body. So sometimes people wonder, like, well, Leo, if God is real and love is real, how come I can't see it? Where is the love? I don't see any love right now. I don't see any God right now. That's because you are somewhere on the periphery of this field, and what maintains your place on that periphery is precisely your inability to handle love. It's your fear of love. So this axis right here of this radial model that we're creating, the center of it is pure infinite love, and the very edge of it is complete, utter terror and horror and fear, the stuff of nightmares. And most humans are somewhere in the middle. You're somewhere in the middle. So right now, you are not able to access the love of God because you're too afraid, and you're too attached, and you're too selfish, and you'd have to give all that up. You'd have to surrender your games, your lies, your manipulation, your cheating, your stealing, your sexual cravings, your selective sexual cravings for various partners. You would literally have to become so conscious that you cease seeing distinctions between people who you could have sex with. You see, because to understand God's love, you'd have to be completely indiscriminate in your love. That means you couldn't look at this woman over here and say, oh, well, she's beautiful, and this person, oh, she's ugly and old. You couldn't do that. You see, if you want to maintain that kind of judgment and that kind of discrimination, that is precisely what keeps you somewhere here on the periphery. So you see, God is caught in a catch-22 because as the singularity, as the Godhead, God's only desire is to share its love with all of its beings. In fact, the reason that there are these fragmented parts of consciousness around the singularity is because without these fragments of consciousness, God would never be able to share itself with anybody else. Because you see, one of the implications of total oneness is that when you realize infinity and God is totally one, it feels like this, like, oh my God, I am God, I am love, I am the most amazing, beautiful, miraculous thing in existence. I am singular. I am the only thing here. Oh my God, this is so amazing. I completely understand myself. I'm completely unlimited. I'm completely in God mode. Nothing can stop me. I can do whatever I want. That's how it feels like. But then God realizes a problem because God is so amazing, but who do I tell? Who do I share my amazement with? There's no one to share it with because I'm singular, I'm complete, I'm total, I'm one. There's no other being to share my love with. And because I am love, I am so selfless that I can't contain the love to myself because it would be selfish of me just to be complete, all whole by myself, one, without anything else. So it's precisely because I'm so selfless that then what has to happen is that I have to create all the other selves out there, all the other beings, all the other fragments of consciousness. I literally break my wholeness. I give up my own love. and my completeness such that I could create incomplete parts of myself, such that later I recognize, because I'm infinitely conscious, that all those parts will come back together and merge back into me and realize what I am. And through that process, I will be able to share my love with myself. You see, I can only share and realize the full potential of my love by forgetting that I am love and that I am God. And in this way, I trap myself into a limited form somewhere far on the periphery. And then I begin my slow process back towards infinite consciousness and infinite love through the desire which has been implanted in every living being. And for that matter, all inanimate matter as well. The motion of all inanimate matter, from stars to galaxies to planets to molecules, all of it is a desire for an ultimate reunification. And so this now unifies us with the notion of what gravity is. What is gravity? Gravity is what happens when you take a bunch of molecules, throw them into an empty room. They all start to move towards each other. Why are they moving towards each other? Because they're separate, and now consciousness needs to reconstitute itself into a singularity. So what I'm talking about here is not just the psychology of humans or animals. We're literally unifying the motion of every single molecule and every being in the entire cosmos. See, we're explaining why molecules move. We're explaining why water moves downhill. We're explaining why nebula clouds form. We're explaining why stars form. We're explaining why planets orbit stars. We're explaining why there are black holes. We're explaining why light curves due to gravitation, as Einstein's predicted. We're explaining why there are galaxies that spiral around and collapse into each other. We're explaining supernovas. We're explaining all human activity, criminal and saintly, and all animal behavior, including sex and the desire for food, all of it. We're explaining all of it. So appreciate the size of this thing, of this explanation. So the desire that has been implanted in all matter, in all objects, in all living beings, is gradually pulling it towards greater and greater unification, until ultimately everything unifies into one seamless singularity. But it's not so simple as just objects are automatically drawn towards each other. Of course, for every force, there must be an opposite and equal force. So even though objects are attracted to each other, they're also repelled from each other. You see? So even though you desire sex with that beautiful woman, maybe, or you desire to marry that perfect husband, yes, you're attracted, but at the same time, you're also repelled. There's aspects of that person that you don't like. You know, she gets older, you stop liking her, you know, you lose attraction for her, you see? So there's attraction and repulsion at the same time. The reason that there's this repulsion is because of fear. Fear is absolutely fundamental. Fear is the opposite of love or the lack of love. So the reason you're repelled by certain things is because you notice, and maybe you've noticed this in your relationships, when you get, at first the way a relationship starts is that you're all lonely sitting at home. And it sucks, right? It's like, oh man, I'm all alone. I need some friends. I need a woman. I need a man, whatever. So you go out there and you make some friends. You find a woman, you find a man. Maybe you sleep with them. And now you're getting closer and closer and closer, right? As you're dating, you're getting closer and closer. Then you sleep with them. And then as you're having sex, you get even closer and closer. It becomes very intimate to the point where literally you merge into the other person. And then for a lot of people who are not comfortable with intimacy, it gets too close. Maybe you felt this. You get too close to a person. Now you want your space. So you've had your intimate sex, and then now you want to go and you want to take some time apart. Because you don't want to be with this person, you know, attached at the hip 24/7. You need space apart. So you start taking space apart. Now, see, there's a repulsion. Why is that? Because you're afraid that if you merge too deeply into the other person, you'll lose yourself. You'll lose your sense of identity, of individuality. And that's precisely what keeps you away from the center, is your fear of losing your individuality from God. So every living organism is playing this game. we're trying to get close and to unite together with something, with money, with sex, with drugs, with men, with women, with whatever, with business. But also not too close, because if we get too close, we get annihilated. And we're afraid of annihilation. And so your specific degree of fear versus love, selfishness versus selflessness, is what determines your position along this entire radial model. And so does your consciousness. So as you become more and more conscious, what happens is you realize that, wait a minute, why am I artificially limiting myself? Why do I have these petty desires that are so limited? Like, why do I love that person just because she has a beautiful face? Why don't I love the person with the old ugly face? Why can't I love both equally? Why do I love that man but not this man? Why do I love money but not the lack of money? Why do I love a big house but not a small house? Why? What is the point? Aren't I being selfish when I'm doing this? What if I can release all that, and as I become more conscious, I release that, I become even more conscious, more selfless, and as I become more selfless, as I stop discriminating and judging all these things, I feel how good it feels. I get a little taste of selflessness. I get a little taste of that God state. The God state is just total selflessness. But I'm not ready yet to become completely selfless and completely God, because I'm still terrified. You know, I still want to have a nice house. I still want to have a nice car. I still want to have enough money to go to a restaurant. I still want to have some sex. You know, I don't want to give up all my sex. I don't want to give up all my money. I don't want to give up all my, living arrangements and all that stuff. I don't want to give up my physical appearance. I don't want to give up my age. I don't want to give up my health. I don't want to experience pain in my body. I don't want to give up my comfort. And so because of that, I'm stuck right here. But that's selfishness, you see. And the more I cling to selfishness, I fall into this counterintuitive trap where I think that by being selfish, I'm going to get all my needs met, I'm going to become happy. But actually what I realize is that I will never be happy, no matter how much money I get or sex I get or drugs I get or whatever I get. Success, fame, it doesn't matter. I'll never be happy. And the reason I won't ever be happy, you might think, well, damn it, God is such an asshole. Why would God not allow me to just earn $1 million and then just to be happy for the rest of my life? Why wouldn't God allow me to marry one man and just to be happy with that one man? Why do I have to be so restless? Why do I have to get jealous of other men and try to have sex with other men and all this sort of stuff? Why? You think that God is actually being evil by doing this, but actually no, it's because of God's love. You see, if God allowed you to be totally fulfilled by a finite achievement, such as some sex, some drugs, some money, some success, some fame, whatever, that would actually make God evil, because then God would consign you to always be stuck in that finite mode. So the reason that there's hedonic adaptation, they call this hedonic adaptation psychology, where no matter how much stuff you acquire, you're never satisfied. This is actually for your highest good, because what this means is that this will push you to face your fears and to move towards the only true happiness that exists, which is the satisfaction of being utterly complete as God. See, so if there wasn't hedonic adaptation, you would actually get trapped. So God invented hedonic adaptation to make sure that every living being eventually merges and realizes itself. See? So it's done for your benefit, even though from your point of view, it might seem like it's a bad thing. God doesn't want you to get stuck in finite things. But here's God's ultimate problem, is that God would love nothing more than just to reveal itself to you and just shower you with infinite love. But the problem is that if it does that, it would kill you. Literally, you would cease to exist. But before you die, it would shock you, traumatize you, and horrify you. Why is that? Because God's love is so indiscriminate. Before you're able to feel and achieve this love for yourself, you would have to, first of all, recognize that this love is completely unconditional. and unlimited. That means that God loves Hitler as much as he loves the Buddha, loves Christ as much as he loves Hindus, loves terrorists as much as he loves rapists, loves cats as much as he loves dogs, loves your enemies as much as he loves your friends, loves humans as much as he loves rats or insects or aliens. See? But most people are not willing to open their mind to such a radical, indiscriminate love. Why not? Because you're so busy surviving. You're attached to surviving as a finite self. But love, unconditional love, by definition, means that you can't exist as a finite self. So there's this fundamental tension between the finite self and the infinite self. The fearful self that needs to survive and worry about its survival needs versus the unlimited self, which is infinite and has no form and has no survival needs whatsoever. It doesn't care if it survives or not because it has no form. So you're stuck in this tug of war. And so even though God would love to shower you with its love, it can't, not because God is bad or withholding itself from you or because God is some asshole. It's because you're too afraid. It's because you're too attached and you're too closed-minded. That's it. If you were willing to surrender all of your biological needs, all of your psychological needs, all of your spiritual needs even, your need to live, your need to breathe, your need for food, for water, for sex, for comfort, for a job, for success, for a career, for children, for your culture, if you were to surrender your entire mind, all of your religious beliefs, all of your scientific beliefs, if you were willing to surrender everything you've learned about reality, your culture, your preferences for food, for drink, for drugs, for happiness, for entertainment, if you were willing to surrender everything, then what would be left? Nothing. Infinity, pure love, pure emptiness, pure oneness, pure God, pure consciousness, consciousness free of any particular attachment or form. But are you willing to do that? You see the problem? You're not willing to do it. And the reason you're not willing to do it is because you're afraid. You're sitting there wondering, but Leo, if I get rid of all these things, how am I going to feed my children? That's right, you won't be able to. But Leo, how will I clothe myself? That's right. You may not have clothes. But Leo, how do I maintain a job? You may lose your job. But Leo, how do I maintain my body? That's right, you may lose your body. But Leo, how do I stay alive? That's right, you're going to lose your life. You see, the twisted thing that mankind has done is we've taken death, or rather, we've taken infinite love and we've called it death. We've taken God and we've called it death. What mankind calls death is nothing other than infinite, omniscient, omnipotent, all-loving, pure consciousness. That's what you become when you completely die and relinquish every single one of your attachments. Everything. You become God. And to the degree to which you have finite attachments is to the degree that you're separated from God. You are separating yourself from God. And the reason God can't help you is because you are God separating yourself. What do you want God to do? You want God to force its love and goodness upon you? You see, there's an existential problem here with goodness. God is pure, absolute, infinite goodness. But precisely because it is that, the problem is, how do you get someone to be good? If you take a finite fearful being and you force goodness upon him, that's not goodness. You see, goodness is something you have to come to through your own recognizance. You have to recognize goodness and you have to want to desire to be good for the sake of being good. Why is God absolute good? Because good is its own reward. Good is the only thing that is good because it's good. Good is its own purpose. And oneness can't have a purpose outside of itself. And goodness, of course, is the same thing as love. Love can't have a purpose outside of itself. Love has to love for the sake of wanting to love, not for the sake of anything else. Goodness, to be good, is to be good just for the sake and joy of being good, not because you have to, not because somebody told you, not because there's some higher being sitting above you, judging you, telling you that you must be good in order to satisfy me. That's not true goodness. True goodness is when you're good, when you have no reason to be good. It's a outpouring. See? So God's problem is that it wants to share with all of its fragmented finite parts. It wants to share the beauty of goodness, of absolute goodness. But because the cost of absolute goodness is surrendering your whole life and all of your attachments, see, God can't force this upon you. Because if God forced this upon you, God would be killing you with love, literally. And terrifying you and traumatizing you. So God has to be very careful with how it approaches you with the love. It has to give you subtle clues so that you can see the potential for love and for goodness, and then you overcome your own fear and you choose love and goodness out of a conscious choice, not because you were, bullied into it or forced into it somehow. Because if I force you to be good, you're not actually truly good. And God's desire is for everyone to become truly good and to realize the absolute goodness of the universe. That's God's highest desire. But see, put yourself in God's shoes. Imagine that imagine you're a saintly human being, and you've overcome all of your neediness and all of your attachments and all this, and you're just purely good. You just are good for the sake of being good. And then you come into contact with some criminal who acts like some idiot and is selfish all the time and, is petty, stealing stuff and hitting people and all this. How would you teach this criminal the power of goodness? Would you hit him over the head, tie him to a chair, and then force him to watch a lecture about how good it is to be good until he memorized it and then he could recite it word for word, and then he goes around and then you would judge him. You would sit there and you would judge him, and every time he didn't behave good according to your standards, you would judge him and you would tell him how bad he is and how much you don't love him and all this. Is that the method you would use? Well, if you use that method, you would turn him into a monster, an even greater criminal than he already is. You have to take a counterintuitive and subtle approach here. To transform this criminal, what you'd have to do is you'd have to exhibit your own goodness. You'd have to share some of your own goodness with him. Cook him a good meal, take him into your house, be nice to him, play some board games with him, take him out to the park, introduce him to your friends, go to a party with him, have deep conversations about him, help him to get over his fears, help him to get over his addictions, help him to deal with his childhood trauma from his abusive parents, overcome all of that, give him some money, all of that. By doing that, then that person would realize, oh my God, this person transformed my life with his goodness. This person was a role model for me, and now I want to be good too. Because I've overcome all that shit from my past. Now I'm a little bit better than I used to be, and now I want to share that goodness with others as well. You see, that's how you truly transform someone. But you see the problem? It's a long, difficult process. It takes the patience of a saint. to do this kind of work. And it takes enormous selflessness because you have to give a lot of your time, energy. And you know, when you're dealing with a dysfunctional person, a lot of times when you give them love, they will react against you. They will lash out to test your love because they don't believe that true love exists. So, you know, you take a child who was beaten and sexually abused, you put them into a new foster home with nice parents who are perfect and saintly. But that child is not just going to accept those saintly parents. That child has a deep wound in his psyche, and that child is never going to trust those parents. Those parents have to win over the love of that child by just constantly showering him with unconditional love for years, for decades, until the child, the love will heal the child's wounds, and the child will learn to love from that process. See? There's actually a video, I watched a video on YouTube a while back, very fascinating, of a feral kitten. Just some random YouTube guy found a feral kitten. The kitten's mother, the kitten's mother died for some reason. The kitten, you could tell the kitten was like just born into the world. Its mother is dead. It's received no love, and it had this like just traumatic birth, traumatic upbringing for the first few days. And then this guy just finds this kitten, tries to save this kitten. But when he's picking up this kitten is clawing at him and biting and screaming and scratching. Like the kitten, you could tell the kitten is completely terrified. You could tell it's like this little being that got born into the world, this little piece of consciousness that got born into the world. It's so small, it's so fragile, so finite. It needs to fight for its survival so much that the question of love and goodness is completely out of its mind. And then so this guy in this video, maybe I'll post it on my blog. This guy in the video, he's like an expert. He's a professional at this. He rescues these kittens. So he takes this kitten and then he spends the next several months training this kitten, hand feeding this kitten every single meal for the next couple of months. He feeds from his hands little pieces to this kitten. It's so time consuming. He spends hours lavishing attention on this kitten, carefully petting the kitten, and you could see he does sort of a time lapse of the kitten's reactions. And at first, you know, he tries to pet the kitten bites him. The kitten won't even allow his hand to come near its face. But then over time, as he hand feeds every meal to this kitten, the kitten gets used to his hands, gets used to getting petted on the head, then on the back, then on the feet, then on the tail, and all this. And then 2 months later, the kitten is completely rehabilitated, and now it's like more or less a fully functioning normal kitten. So what happened there? Love happened. A lack of love is what twists and contorts consciousness and makes it dysfunctional and satanic, we might say, filled with fear and selfishness and attachment. And then by infusing that bit of consciousness with more and more love, that consciousness gets untangled, unwound. The fear, the attachment, the selfishness gets released. That little bit of consciousness feels the love of the larger bit of consciousness feeding into it. And then it becomes self-sufficient. It can stand on its own two legs, and then it can exude love as well. So what's happening, this is exactly what's happening and what's been happening throughout your entire life. With every single human being on the entire planet for the entire history of mankind. This is what's been happening, is that the love and consciousness of that God singularity has been feeding into every single bit of fractured human consciousness, trying to raise it and elevate it. But all these fragments, because they're limited, they're so scared and afraid that they're resisting. And God understands all this in its infinite intelligence, and so it's gently planting seeds, gently applying love so that it doesn't overwhelm you. You might imagine, in that kitten example, if the guy was so blunt with his love that he just ran after that kitten, you know, that he found in the forest somewhere with its mother dead, this kitten is just completely terrified of any living beings, including humans. and he just wants to hug it and kiss it and smother it in love. See, if he did that, the kitten would be completely terrified and it would bite him and it would freak out and it wouldn't work. So he has to apply the love gently. And that is what God is doing with you. It's giving you subtle clues. It's been giving you subtle clues your entire life. The problem is that you are scared, you're attached, you're extremely selfish, and you're not conscious that any of this is going on. You just think you're living in some physical reality. You just think you're like some human that evolved from some monkey that's just doing some dumb stuff in the world. And you numb yourself out. You numb your consciousness by watching television, playing video games. You distract yourself from your true mission here, which is to become more selfless, surrender attachments, give up your fears, face your fears, and to open yourself up to love. Opening up yourself up to love requires consciousness. It must be done consciously. It's not enough to just go gorge yourself at a buffet, stuff yourself with greasy food. It's not enough to just go have a bunch of unconscious sex with a bunch of people, one-night stands. It's not enough to just go hoard a bunch of money on Wall Street. You need to consciously understand why selflessness is superior to selfishness. As you act more and more selfishly, what happens is that the selfishness starts to backfire on itself. You start to notice through trial and error that this selfish way of living that you've been trying just doesn't produce the fulfillment and happiness that you want, that you know is possible for you. And so that forces you to relinquish that selfish behavior and then to push yourself out past your comfort zone, beyond your fears, into a higher mode of being, a more selfless mode of being. And as you do that, you get the reward of love and the reward of being good and selfless, which is its own reward. It is the highest reward. There is no higher reward in life than love. Just it's a question of how deep is your love and how wide is your love. The deeper and wider it is, the more of a reward it is until it becomes infinite. And at that point, the reward becomes infinite. I've experienced states of infinite love that are so infinite that I'm left writhing around on the floor in an infinite orgasm. These are orgasms that would make sexual orgasms pale in comparison. See, the Godhead itself is as though in an infinite orgasm forever, because it's completely in love with itself. All the parts are completely fused and merged into one seamless totality. That's the Godhead. It's infinite orgasmic love forever. Imagine how good it is to have sex with the most beautiful person you've ever seen. Pretty good, right? Now imagine you can keep having sex with that person, your favorite person, forever. Forever. With no limitation, no end. And your orgasms have no limit. Completely unlimited. Unlimited in degree, in depth, in length, in every dimension unlimited. And you can have as many of them as you want. You can string together as many of them as you want until they turn into one continuous, never-ending orgasm. That's one person. Now imagine that your consciousness becomes so infinite that it stops discriminating between different people who you could have sex with. So you're having sex not just with your favorite, most beautiful, supermodel, but you're having sex with every beautiful supermodel who's ever lived. But then your consciousness goes beyond that. It becomes even more loving, more indiscriminate. Now you're having sex not just with the supermodels, but even with the average-looking people. And then you become even more selfless and you realize, wait a minute, why am I limiting myself? Why don't I have an orgasm with every living human who's ever lived on the entire planet, no matter what they look like. And so you do that, and you're in an endless orgasm with all of them. And then you realize, wait a minute, why am I only limiting myself to the females? Let me also include the males. And so you include all of them, and then you realize, wait a minute, why am I limiting myself to humans? Why don't I have an infinite orgasm with every single living being on this entire planet? Wait a minute, why am I limiting myself to just living beings? Why don't I include the entire ecosystem of this planet as well? And so you merge into that. And then you say, wait a minute, why this planet? Why not the solar system? Why not the Milky Way galaxy? Why not the entire universe? Why not every single thing possible? Why don't I merge every single thing possible into one and I become it forever? That's true love. That's infinity. That's the Godhead. You see, but to do that, what would have to happen? You would have to completely surrender everything about yourself. You'd have to surrender all of your criticisms, all of your hatreds, all of your judgments, all of your pettiness, all of your ideas, all of your beliefs, all of your ideology, every group of people you hate, your racism, your sexism, your homophobia. You'd have to surrender everything, and you'd have to surrender your desire to survive as a finite thing. You'd have to surrender your biological impulses. You'd have to surrender the desire for sex. So the only one keeping you from God is yourself. And of course, the only reason that is because you are God. Only God is powerful enough to fool itself into believing that it's not God and to keep itself from infinite love through fear and through imagination and through dreaming and through illusion. And the reason God structured this entire thing, this is not an accident, this is all by design. The reason it's designed this way is because imagine if you were an unlimited, omnipotent, all-loving being, and you had all the time in the world, and you could create and design anything. What would you create and what would you design? What would be the only worthwhile thing to create? Love. What would be the only worthwhile thing to share? Love. So then, by that logic, the only thing you would create is that which maximizes the sharing of love in the universe. And the way you would do that is by creating finite parts of yourself that don't remember the love, that are disconnected from the love, such that then they can experience the joy and the gift of discovering love. So the structure of the entire universe is designed such that every living being discovers infinite love. And that's what we call death. Ta-da! Are you getting all this? Is it making sense to you now? Why you're here? Precisely why you're here. I want you to understand why it is that you're exactly where you are in your life and not somewhere else. You are where you are because you have to be there. And God completely understands why you are where you are. God is not separate from you. God is looking through your eyes right now, stuck in that limited frame of consciousness that you're stuck in. And God is trying to gently wake you up by sending you little bits of love, by injecting you with some passion and some desire. Notice what all of your desires in your entire life have really been about. what you've really sought is you've sought a sense of completeness. That's really what you want in your life. You don't really want money. You don't really want sex. You don't really want a fast car. You don't want a big house. You don't want to live in another country. All of those things were just things you thought you needed in order to feel whole and complete and at peace, to be satisfied, to feel loved, to love your own self. That's the only thing you've ever wanted. You've wanted to be unlimited and infinite. So your entire life, from your very birth, you've been searching for God. Not realizing that he's right here. He's right there. See? You've been pursuing God unconsciously. And that can never work. You can't reach God unconsciously because God is infinite consciousness. You see, you might say, well, Leo, but if God was so loving, why wouldn't God just create humans in such a way that they would just instantly recognize God? God can't do that. Because that would be to force an unconscious thing to be conscious. That's impossible. Consciousness is the only thing that can become conscious of itself. So if you don't realize that you're God and that you're love and that you're infinite, nobody else can because you're the only thing there is. You're it. You have to awaken to itself. God has to awaken to itself. Stop thinking of God as some other up there somewhere who's better than you or higher than you or more powerful than you. It's you, but you're stuck in your own self. You have to get over yourself in order to actualize yourself as God. And then it'll all be crystal clear and you'll completely understand why it had to be this way. It makes complete and perfect sense. It's a design of the most brilliant order. It's infinitely brilliant. All of God's intelligence is going towards awakening itself, which is the same thing as to say towards the sharing of its love with all beings. It's a lot of responsibility to know this information. Because once you know this information, now you sort of realize your trajectory. You understand what all human development is about, what all self-help is about. And it becomes very clear what your path should be if you want to move towards God. The problem is that a lot of people love to distract themselves. They orbit around the center, but they never move their orbit towards the center. You see, they're just comfortable spiraling around and around and around forever. And like I said, God can't force you to move towards the center. You have to want to do it yourself through your own recognizance. You have to recognize that, oh, I'm a fucking idiot for staying out here when I could be closer to the center. And it feels just like taking a rocket ship and flying straight into the sun. In fact, to make it even more of a poignant metaphor, imagine that you are a vampire and we put you on a rocket ship and we angle that rocket ship straight into the sun and we fire it away. How are you going to feel as a vampire? You're going to be terrified because sunlight is the thing you fear the most. And the closer you get to the sun, the more light there's going to be, the more it's going to burn. What is it going to do, though? It's going to burn out all of your impurities, all of your selfishness, all of your fear, until eventually the rocket ship will actually enter the sun, burn into it, and then you will merge and you will become one with the sun, and you will radiate the light of the sun, the infinite light of the sun. That's what human life is about. And then the only question is, how far away are you from the center? And then how willing are you to move towards the center? And then what are the action steps you got to do to kind of close your orbit in closer and closer and closer until eventually you burn up into the sun? And are you willing to do that at all? Because I would probably estimate that 98% of humans are not willing to actually go all the way to the singularity. They're willing to approach, get closer, and as you get closer, your life gets better, society gets nicer, people treat each other better. But that final step to completely extinguish yourself into that singularity, you're gone forever. You become nothingness forever. You cease material existence. That's a tall order. Most people are not willing to surrender absolutely everything to get that. And I'm not saying you should, you see, because if I forced you to do it, if I guilted you and said, oh, you're a bad person because you don't want to go all the way, you don't want to kill yourself, you don't want to turn into God, you're a devil. If I took this tack, then I would be forcing you. And that wouldn't be right. Because I'm conscious enough to understand that I can't force you to enter the singularity. The only thing that can enter the singularity is God itself. So you will have to transform yourself into God, literal God, to enter that singularity. And the only way you're going to do that is through a gradual process of development and growth and raising of your awareness and consciousness and love. So here's one very practical takeaway I have for you from all this abstract metaphysical talk. How do you get rid of attachments? How do you fundamentally grow yourself at the highest level? Not by disciplining yourself and forcing yourself to do stuff in life. Not by telling yourself, oh, I have to read books, oh, I have to meditate, oh, I have to do what Leo says, oh, I have to watch another video, oh, I have to go to this seminar, I have to go to this workshop, I have to do this retreat, I have to do these psychedelics, I have to do all this stuff in order to get to some place that Leo talks about. No. That's a neurotic way of going about it, and it's not going to get you all the way. If you want to get all the way you get there is through love. Fill yourself with the love that the world has denied you. The love that you didn't get from your parents, from your siblings, from your teachers, from your colleagues and friends, from your ex-partners and lovers and spouses, from your failed projects, from your failed businesses, from your failure to pursue money or fame or success. All that love that you failed to get, figure out how to give it to yourself. And as you do, you're going to become more and more satisfied. More and more of your needs are going to get met. You're going to become less and less needy, less and less selfish. You're going to recognize the power of love and goodness, and then you will then start to act that way. And as you start to act more loving and more good, you will attract more loving and better people around you. That love will create an echo chamber where the love you broadcast out gets reflected back at you, which then just gives you more passion for love, and then you want to be even more loving and more selfless, and it creates a positive feedback loop. And in this way, you overcome all of your problems in life. You move towards the center. And whether you ever reach the center or not, I don't know. That's up to you if you want to go that far. But regardless, just understand that the process of self-development is moving towards the center from the periphery. This applies both individually and collectively. So individually for your personal life, but also collectively, like we talk about spiral dynamics, for example, models such as that. What is spiral dynamics but just a society collectively moving towards the singularity, relinquishing more and more fear and attachment. That's all that these spiral stages are about, relinquishing fear and attachment. How do you relinquish fear? One, by facing it and realizing that it's an illusion. Two, by facing it and letting it pummel you and letting it burn and singe you and burn out all your impurities. Three, through love. The more love you receive, the less fearful you're going to be. The only reason you're fearful of stuff is because either people didn't give you the love that you desired, or you didn't know how to give yourself the love that you needed. So one of the things I'll be emphasizing a lot in future content of mine is how to fill yourself with the love that the world denies you. That is the crucial skill you got to learn. And I'll have much more to say about that. I'll have some practical exercises for you and so forth. But it's very possible to do. And the reason fundamentally that it's possible to do it is because you are love. Love is what you are. So you don't need love from the outside. You just need to remove the obstacles in your own mind, which are preventing you from generating your own love. That's the real beauty of this work. That's what makes reality so wonderful, is that it's a non-zero-sum game in the sense that love is infinite. You are love, and so you're able to give yourself the love that you crave. You just have to know how. See, because if you go into this with this attitude of like, well, yeah, Leo says I need love, but hey, and then you tell your spouse, hey, you're not giving me that love that Leo says I need. So because of that, now I'm going to act like an asshole, and I'm justified to act like an asshole because Leo says that I will keep acting like an asshole as long as I don't get the love that you're supposed to give me. No. No, you don't get it. You got to take responsibility for giving yourself the love that your spouse or your parents or your boss or your coworkers are not giving you. Because if you're expecting others to give you infinite love, the love of God, well, you're always going to fail. You're always going to keep going around and around in a circle, because the whole point of realizing infinite love is to realize that it's you. Infinite love is not something separate from you. It's completely your nature. It's more you than the molecules that are making up the cells in your body. That's what you got to realize. I want you to think about what your life would look like if you no longer were selfish. If you no longer approached it from the frame of what's in it for me in every situation. So you enter a relationship or a marriage, it's no longer about what can she do for me? What can he get for me? You go into a business, it's no longer about what can my customers earn me so I can buy a big house for me and my family. When you go to school, it's not about what can I learn, how can I make myself the smartest person in the world, but it's like, how can this be about me being selfless? And so on in every situation in your life. Imagine if you were selfless. Imagine if you had no needs. Imagine if you were able to love and to exude and radiate love in every situation in your life. Imagine how you would feel. Imagine what that might look like. Imagine what things you'd have to surrender to achieve this. Imagine what fears you have right now would need to be faced and conquered. Imagine what attachments you have right now where you need life to be this way, or you need this person to be that way, or you need to control this situation here. Imagine what you would have to let go of in order to be loving in all these situations. That is a vision of your future. Should you choose to pursue love, you don't have to. You can keep being selfish, but also recognize that as you're being selfish, you're creating your own suffering. It's not that the world is inherently full of suffering and pain. No, it's that the way that you are living in the world and the attachments you have and the way that you insist things must be for you to be happy, that is what's creating your misery and suffering. So the real question is, what do you have to let go of that you're not willing to let go of, that you're clinging to, in order to free yourself to be selfless, loving, good, and happy? That's the secret to happiness. And now it's very apparent why most people around us are not happy. That they're just pretending. Because who amongst us is really willing to undergo this process to a deep degree and really willing to surrender a whole giant chunk of themselves? Very few people. Are you willing to surrender 99% of your attachments, cravings, beliefs, judgments, criticisms, habits? No, you're completely attached to all that stuff. Which is why you keep suffering and your life keeps being as frustrating as it always was. And this is difficult work. It's not easy. It's not easy to surrender this stuff, not at all. And sometimes it makes me doubt how far I'm going to go on this journey, because sometimes I see, you know, what a full realization of my potential would be like, and it's terrifying. It's terrifying how much stuff I would have to give up. There are so many, you know, petty things that I want to cling to. It's terrifying. But that's also what makes life so real. This is real work here. Learning how to love the world and oneself is the only work in the universe of any value. So what's really going on with the universe is that the universe is learning how to love itself. That's all that's happening. God is training itself to love itself, with the ultimate conclusion being that once God has fully trained itself to love itself, it becomes its highest form, which is just love and God. And everything that I've explained here, that is what God is. It's not merely what God is doing. It's not merely God's plan. It's not merely God's design for humans. That is the structure of the universe. That is the structure of God. That is the very manifestation and epitome of love. Love is not just some substance. Love is both the substance of the universe, consciousness, but love is also the structure of it. The fact that the substance is being used to create structures which then help every part of the field of consciousness to recognize itself as love, that is the very definition and expression and manifestation of love. To love is to help others to love. To love is to not leave anyone behind without love. To love is to create a reality in which every piece of reality gets to participate in the highest form of love, by making sure it will go through the ultimate reunification. Now, how many lifetimes it takes you to reach this ultimate reunification, I don't know. It's going to vary person to person, being to being. It might take you 100 lifetimes. I don't know. It might just take you one. It depends on how selfless and fearless you are. If you're totally selfless and fearless, you can do it in one lifetime. But if you're resisting and you're selfish and you had a bad childhood and you're being lazy about it, then you can keep orbiting around for lifetime and lifetime and lifetime, playing all sorts of games. And it's God's love to allow you to do that. Because you see, if God forced you to relinquish all of your fantasies and dreams and games and hallucinations, that wouldn't be very loving. You have to come to God. God is not going to come to you. That's the mistake that many materialists and atheists and scientists make, is they think like, oh, well, God will just accost me. If God exists, God will just accost me. And, despite all my skepticism and my closed-mindedness, God will just thrust himself into my mind. No, it can't be that way, because you are God. You have to open your own mind to the fact that you're God. And then that creates some space and some possibility. So there you go. That's the structure of all of life. Hope everything is clear for you now. Now you have all the answers. Now all you got to do is you got to go actualize it. Easy, right? All right, I'm done here. Please click that like button for me. Come check out my website. You'll find my blog with exclusive content, exclusive videos. You'll find the forum. You'll find the book list. You'll find my life purpose course. And the final thing I'll say is this. I think it was Einstein has a famous quote where he said something like, the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it's comprehensible. That's a very good quote. One of the things that's astounded me the most in all of my awakenings is just the fact that I have been able to achieve infinite degrees of understanding. Some Enlightenment teachers will poo-poo the idea of understanding, and they will say, "Oh, you don't need understanding. That's just a function of the ego mind. Just sit in silence and meditate or whatever, or self-inquire. Understanding is some sort of illusion." No, what I'm here to tell you is that no, understanding is not an illusion. Consciousness, the very nature of consciousness, is that it's capable of infinite self-understanding. And since you are consciousness, you are capable of infinite self-understanding. And it's very sad. It's very sad, a sad state of affairs that you are going through life without ever experiencing infinite self-understanding. The universe understands itself completely. Your job is to connect with that understanding as a human. Your human mind can connect with the mind of God. They can merge into one, such that then everything becomes clear to you. You understand why things are happening the way they're happening. It's an amazing achievement. So don't let people tell you that understanding is worthless, or understanding is impossible, or understanding is something that the ego mind is doing. No, there is a certain logical structure to reality and to God. You can cognize it. You can understand it. And the reason you can is because you're unlimited. And any limits you have, they're completely a function of your own imagination. It's just a question of becoming more and more conscious and unraveling layers and layers of your imagination, because your imagination goes very deep, all the way to the rock bottom of physical reality itself, which is also imaginary, something you're imagining, but unaware of how you're doing so. You can unravel that entire thing, and you can get to the bottom of it, and you can get access to incredible insights and understanding and wisdom, which then you can use to restructure your entire life. And then you can become, as we talked about, superhuman.